sato ma satagamaya tamaso maham jyotirgamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avir avir maedhi rudra yate dakshinam mukha te namaham pahi nityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is yoga and psychotherapy. And we're going to be talking about psychology, East and West. By yoga, I mean the Raja Yoga of Patanjali. And by psychotherapy, I'm not referring to any one particular school, but referring in general to Western applied clinical psychology. Yoga and psychotherapy. Each one is a methodology that is applied to a different spectrum of self-development. Both are necessary. Each one is great in its own place. But the duty of the one is not the duty of the other. And so this morning we're going to look a little more closely here at what is the difference. Now we can begin by visualizing a mountain and a deep valley. And there are going to be three points of reference in this graphic organizer. One is the floor of the valley. One is the hilltop, somewhere in the foothills. And the other is the peak of the mountain. And beginning at the bottom, we're going to see that there are two great ideals in life. One is to become a man. That means a fully self-actualized, integrated person. And the second is to become a God-man. That is a yogi who has realized his true nature. The path to the first one is all about manifesting the perfection already in man. And the second part of the journey is all about manifesting the divinity in man. So let's begin with the first part. Western psychology is characterized by the discovery that personal psychological growth is a developmental process. And we can use a little integral theory here to talk about, notice that we have multiple lines of development: physical, vital, emotional, psychological, interpersonal, moral. And each one of those lines of development is characterized by multiple stages. And so the self begins with a body self, then the energy vital self, the emotional self, as it's kind of moving up in a developmental fashion. That is, there's personal growth. And by growth here, what we mean is that we're moving from the lower to the higher. And growth takes place in a kind of a threefold waltz time process. It's like a circular spiral. We begin by identifying with one stage. We go around that stage and run the course of that, learn our lesson at that stage. And then we slowly differentiate from that, transcend, and include the lower. That is, that the self of the lower becomes the object of the self of the higher. This is a process of developmental growth. Now, at any stage of this development, problems can arise. They could be problems, for example, of failing to identify with one stage or level of growth. They could be a problem of differentiating from that stage. They could be a problem of unhealthy transcendence, failure to include the lower and integrate the lower. These are all psychological problems that arise in the course of our personal growth. Along the way, we have many people to help us. And we're talking here about from our earliest childhood to as we're beginning to grow. Well, we have our parents, and we have our family and friends. We have our teachers. You have your different kinds of professionals, your doctors, and we have mentors, and we have psychologists and psychiatrists. All of these can help us with our problems in the process of our growth. And at some point, theoretically, we reach the age of reason. And we're considered to be adults. And at least according to, in the eyes of the law, we're all grown up. But we know very well that even in middle age, and even in old age, that we're not grown up. And that we still have a lot of those problems that we've been carrying all this time. And therefore, it's obvious that it would be helpful to us to go back and to consult with some of those mentors, whether they're friends or just advisors or professionals, and get the benefit of their wisdom. Now we're talking here now about psychological growth. And so we think about, we could consult. If we have our personal problems, we could consult with the psychologist. Now let's look at psychologists. The psychologists that we're mostly familiar with. I mean, psychology, by the Western experimental psychology, is a very new science. Didn't even begin until maybe 1850. And the names that we're familiar with, just in popular culture, we go back to the earliest names, like Dr. Sigmund Freud and Dr. Carl Jung. These are the people who kind of formulated the vocabulary that we're all familiar with and invented some of the basic concepts that we work with when we try to understand psychological problems. Now, these early psychologists developed what's called depth psychology. I'm speaking very generally now. Depth psychology operates on what we could say is a metaphor of the floating iceberg. Now, you've all seen an iceberg. You've seen pictures of the iceberg. A little tiny portion of that rises above the surface of the water, but the vast majority of that iceberg is the undercarriage is all invisible. It's buried deep in the dark water of the ocean. And this is the idea is that the conscious rational ego is like the tip of the iceberg. These early psychologists were irrationalists, as compared with the philosophy. We're talking here about we're talking about modern psychology as distinct from philosophical psychology of pre-modern times. So the idea is that the rational self is that we think that we are in charge of our life. We think that we make conscious free will decisions in accord with reason. But psychology tells us, no, it's not quite like that. That we have very little, if any, free will. That we are in all of our behavior, thinking, feeling, and willing is influenced and determined by the unconscious, by all of the thoughts, the beliefs, and the ideas, and the hidden wishes, and impulses, and instincts, and repressed traumas, and everything that's down, that's buried in the psyche. This is the source of our motivation. And the idea of depth psychology is that because all of these important factors are hidden and are in the dark, as it were, they're kind of forgotten in the basement of our mind. We don't know what they are, and we don't know how they work, and yet they're crucial in determining our life. And therefore, in order to deal with these things, what we need to do is to bring the unconscious into the conscious. Bring that which is hidden and which is buried up into the light so that we can at least look at it, analyze it, and maybe integrate it and deal with it in our conscious life. This is the purpose of the function of the ego. So to empower the ego is the process of depth psychology. Now, let's look at the goal of this psychology. Both I'm taking as example here, these well-known names of Freud, Dr. Carl Jung. They're beginning to work with patients, that is, people who we would consider to be mentally ill. That means there may be patients who have just some mild neurosis and are just living in denial of their feelings and have all kinds of defense mechanisms, all the way up to other people, much more radical, psychotic issues which involve a break from reality. They're working with patients like this. And they're all considered to be abnormal in some way. Now, the problem with somebody who is, that is to say, when we say abnormal, we mean mentally disordered. See, Plato has the beautiful model of the psyche, the ordered psyche, with the reason is controlled, reason rules the passions and the emotions. These are disordered psyches. Now, a disordered mind has at least two features. One feature is a disorder. It is such a person is unhappy. The second thing we can say about such a person is that they are largely dysfunctional. That is, they don't fit in. They don't get along in society. And therefore, they're considered to be abnormal. And the goal of psychology, therefore, is to make the abnormal person normal. Now, we may say, well, yeah, but what do you mean by normal? We consider who's normal. We look around us and we see that everyone seems to be a little crazy. Yeah, but it's also true that pretty much everybody around us seems to be relatively happy and functioning in society. So maybe we could use that as kind of a rough definition of what's normal. That is relatively happy and functional. And rather than that would seem to be maybe more of a realistic idea than curing people of their craziness. This is a more modest idea of what is normal, and what is the goal of purpose of psychology is to restore the psyche to that normal diagnosis. And it was aptly described by there's a book written long ago. It's a popular psychology book by a clinical psychologist. His name was Thomas Harris. Title kind of summarizes the goal of depth psychology. The title was, I'm okay, you're okay. Now, when you think about it, all right, well, if I'm okay and you're okay, then everything's okay. Problem solved. So, this is kind of the goal of Western psychology, to solve those problems. Now, you may say, well, there's a lot more than just Freudian psychology. What about humanistic psychology? What about positive psychology? What about transpersonal psychology? All of these are just more of the same. So therefore, let's go back and let's look here at go back to our graphic organizer here. Think back of the mountain, and we think of the valley and the foothills. And we think of that person who has now reached the age of reason, or who has maybe gone on in life. That's a person who is now in the foothills. And by that we mean that he is a person, that is to say, he's a fully he is an integrated, actualized, autonomous person. And not only that, we can imagine him. He's come a long way. He had a lot of different kinds of problems. He consulted all those mentors and professionals, and he worked through a lot of his problems. And now, standing on that high place of the foothills, he has family, and he has friends. And we could even visualize him as being a person who is very successful, and he has a good job. Well, maybe let's say that he's very wealthy. Not only that, he's a very good citizen. Maybe he's a celebrity. Maybe he's even a movie star. And he lives in a mansion with crystal chandeliers. And he may have 2 cars and a boat. And he may have traveled all over the world. But he's still not fulfilled. He still feels that there's something, an inner emptiness. And his condition is a lot like in Zen Buddhism. They give the analogy there of a man who climbed up to the top of a 50-foot flagpole. And everyone was applauding him, the great success that he's achieved. He got up to the top of that flagpole, and then he began to think, where do I go from here? What am I going to do now? And if he's sitting there, time passes, he thinks, what's my purpose? Now what is it that's going to give meaning and direction to my life? I've reached the optimum of success. Now at this point, we can see that this person, these thoughts that are going through his mind, these are not personal problems. These are not, the guy at that stage does not have psychological problems. These problems about meaning and about purpose and about identity and about mortality, these are existential problems. That is, they have to do just with being human. And they're not individual, personal issues. These are issues that everyone is a mortal person has. And in fact, these existential problems, we could say, pretty much characterize the collective consciousness of the Western world. And we could say that the Western world, just like this, in the collective, this were great triumphs of success in science and technology, and great achievements of material prosperity. And yet still somehow, in the collective consciousness, there is a sort of dis-ease, a sort of existential depression, verging on a kind of despair. Because why? Well, because we have, in the analysis, God is dead. We've lost all of our spiritual, religious, universal values. We've lost touch with our higher values. And thus we're in this condition of this is a conscious tradition. In fact, Dr. Carl Jung, famous quotation, which you've probably heard, I'm going to paraphrase it for you. And he said that in the last 30 years of my practice, he said, people from all of the civilized countries of the world have consulted with me. And he said, of all those patients who have reached maybe middle age, he said, there has not been a one whose problem was not that in the final analysis, the need for a religious outlook on life. Now, this is the observation of one of the greatest of the Western psychologists. In that regard, we can remember a parable from the Christian Bible in the book of Luke. And there was a man who had a large estate, and he had fields and cattle and sheep and barns, big farmhouse. And one day he had two sons. He called them to him and he said, when I die, look around you. All of this here will be yours. This is your inheritance. And the eldest son, hearing that, said, okay. And he went back to work on the estate. But the younger son thought to himself and asked his father, he said, Father, I want to please give me my portion of the inheritance now. Because I want to go out in the world and make my own way. And so the father gave him that inheritance. And the younger brother left, traveled a long ways, far from the country. And he came down into the big city and the bright lights. And there he began to enjoy his life. And because he had a lot of money in his pocket, he found that he had a few fast friends. And he would buy them wine and champagne. And he often hired musicians. And they would dance the night away. And time passed, and pretty soon he began to smoke, and he began to drink, and he began to gamble. And one day, he woke early in the morning, and he found, I don't really feel that good. My body is sick. I have hardly any money left. And I'm feeling burned out and depressed. And, about that time, a great drought came into that land. Everything dried up. There's no greening out of the fields. Everyone there lost their money, and they were going hungry. And the prodigal son, that means this wasteful son, he thought to himself, he has to get a job. He looked couldn't find a job. There's no work to be had. Finally, he had to settle for tending swine in a stockyard. And there he sat, and he was feeling sick, and he was penniless, and he was feeling depressed, and he was hungry, and he looked at those pigs. They were bringing big bags full of corn, laid out for the pig. Even they are eating so much better than I am. Like this, he began to think. And one day he thought, even the servants in my Father's house have plenty to eat, and they're so well loved and cared for. I will return to my Father's house. And so saying, he set off on the road. And he traveled and he traveled. And he was thinking to himself, as he grew near, I'm going to confess to my Father that I've sinned. I've sinned against God, and I've sinned against his good will, and I've been a very wasteful son, and I've gambled away all of my money, and I will beg him to please maybe allow me to work as a servant on his estate. Like this, he's thinking, and he's very worried, and he's very fearful of when he looks up ahead, the road. What does he see? Coming down the road, there's a man coming down the road. He's running towards him, and with open arms. It was his father. His father said, "Yo, son, welcome back home. and led him back to the farmhouse, and there they had a big banquet. And everyone celebrated the return of the lost son. So that's the old biblical parable. A favorite of transpersonal psychologists. But let's look. We can begin here our look here at yoga psychology, because we're talking now about the road home. We're talking about the way back in the great cycle of life. We begin and go down, went through the whole. So now we're on the return to the source. So let's look a little bit about this. Yoga psychology is the applied, that is to say, Patanjali, Raja Yoga of Patanjali, I'm referring to specifically, is the applied psychology of the Sankhya philosophy. Now, you may not have heard of this word Sankhya philosophy, but if you're a student of Swami Vedarupananda, you know that he gave two very important full lectures on the subject, and it is very helpful for us in understanding Vedanta to understand the Sankhya philosophy, which is included and incorporated into the Vedanta philosophy. The Sankhya philosophy is the basis of yoga psychology. It's radically different from what we would call New Age philosophy, which is the background for what today is called transpersonal psychology. So what we're talking about here now is, we're not talking about that. We're talking about yoga psychology. Now, the Sankhya philosophy begins by, it's beautiful for us because you don't have to worry about any scriptures, the Vedas and all a bunch of Sanskrit verses and all that, because their approach to these great philosophical questions was primarily through the use of reason. And they analyzed the whole world into 25 cosmic principles, and they reduced those to 2. Made it easy for us. There's only 2 things. There is the subject and there is the object. There is nature and there is consciousness. Prakriti and Purusha, those are the Sanskrit words. Prakriti, that is nature, with a capital N. Nature here does not just mean the wilderness areas. Nature here means the whole of the macrocosm, the gross, the subtle, and the causal, and the whole of what we call the microcosm, that is the body and the mind. All of that is included in the idea of nature. Nature just means stuff, what we call matter, because it's not matter of physics. It's a philosophical matter. That's just all stuff. Over and apart from that is pure consciousness. That is our self. That is the Purusha. This is the analysis of the Sankhya philosophers. Now, the Purusha, this is called Raja Yoga. That's because we can imagine this Purusha is like a king. And this king one day, we're told, the analogy here comes from the Kapila, who is the ancient philosopher. The king with his retinue, he goes into a theater to see a stage performance. And he sits down there and the curtain opens and the dancing girls come on stage. And seeing that performance, the king became spellbound. He became mesmerized. He became completely absorbed. He lost awareness of his own existence. Under the spell of Maha Maya, That's the Vedantic words are Maha Maya. Under that spell, he lost his self-awareness. Now that king did not have a psychological problem. He had a existential problem. He had a spiritual problem. That is, the king is not an individual in this analogy. He just represents all of us. He's just symbolic. For all human beings are in exactly that same condition. We've lost awareness of the Purusha, our true nature. Purusha just means the person. What is a person? A person is a self-conscious entity. We've lost our self-consciousness. And we're dependent. We become dependent on nature. And now the goal: how do we get out of this predicament? Well, the teaching of the yoga psychologists is that we have to dehypnotize ourselves. This is the goal. The king has to undo this spell. This is and success in this is going to be what is success? Freedom. That's the goal. Freedom of Raja Yoga. The goal of Raja Yoga is called Kaivalya. That means independence, spiritual independence and freedom from the control of nature. We can see here, radically different. This goal is radically different from what we usually call psychology. This goal seems to be kind of spiritual. It seems to be religious. In fact, the goal of the Sankhya psychology is for that king to realize his soul. You have a soul. You've forgotten you're alienated for your soul. You've forgotten it. And you've identified with all kinds of levels of that which is not yourself. And the basic project is now, as students of spiritual life, is to return to the source. You can see this is very religious. If we take religion, the word religion in the original etymological sense of the Latin re ligare, which means to linking back, connecting back to the source. That's just what yoga is. All the different forms. This morning I'm talking mostly about Raja Yoga, but its principles hold true for all the yogas. And the purpose of all the yogas is to return us to the source. And in Raja Yoga, there's a whole series of stages, which you very well know as students of all the 8 steps of the Raja Yoga, beginning with moral self-discipline. See how this is sounding religious. Moral self-discipline, and then becoming established in moral values. But that's not enough. Morality doesn't make us spiritual. Moralism is not spirituality. We have to do more. We have to develop spiritual virtues. And then we have to do more. We have to withdraw our mind. These are the stages of yoga psychology. I'm just paraphrasing them. I'm not going to give you all that one by one. Once you've established in those spiritual virtues, we need to begin to train ourselves to withdraw from nature. Now, you remember that parable of Ramakrishna? I like that parable of the guy he lives on one side of the lake. And he comes down in the evening, he goes down to his rowboat. He gets in the boat, he rows all the way across the lake to the tavern. There he goes into the tavern. And he begins to drink, and he drinks all evening, a little late in the morning, 2 in the morning. He leaves the tavern. He's intoxicated. In fact, he's drunk. He comes down he's going to go back to his boat. He goes back to the boat, gets in his boat, and he takes the oars, and he begins to row, and he rows and rows and rows. Pretty soon he looks around, he sees the sun is rising, and he sees he hasn't moved an inch. Why is that? He looks at, he forgot to weigh the anchor. He forgot, that's why he didn't make any progress. So we can see that, of course, that's a symbol here for withdrawal. In Sanskrit, it's called, at the stage of Raja Yoga, it's called pratyahara. That's like what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the 4th stage. That's already well along into the practice of yoga. Withdrawing weighing the anchor. That is breaking our attachment to nature. The purpose now is to realize our true self. That is the Purusha. Now the word Purusha we're using is because that's the Sankhya word of the Sankhyas. And the Purusha means what we call our soul. We can call it our soul. You have a soul. And what is the Purusha is defined as the witness. Your soul is the witness. What do we mean by witness? We mean if you imagine that you're standing at your house, you look out the window, and there you see cars go by, there's an auto accident, and you are now a witness. That's one meaning of the word witness. But if you're standing there and you look down at your hands and feet, you can see that you're also witnessing your own body. But of course, we don't say that. We don't speak like that because I am the body. But, and similarly with our mind, we can witness as observe, be aware of our own thoughts and feelings. But most of the time we're identified with it. But the Purusha, that means your soul, is the observer of the body and the mind and of the external world. By that we mean in the Bhagavad Gita. You can read in the Bhagavad Gita in the 13th chapter about the field. The whole chapter is about the field and the knower of the field. Your soul there's the field, that's everything. Then there's the knower of the field. The field that is your soul. Your soul is your spirit. Vedanta says you are the spirit. Psychologically we say I am a spirit. The word spirit. So we have the idea of self, the idea of soul, of spirit. What is spirit? Spirit is just consciousness. Our own self-consciousness. What is consciousness? Consciousness, we can say, is like light. Think back to the theater. The king is there in the theater. The stage play is unfolding. And while all that is happening, there's up on the ceiling, there is a light, the lamp in the theater. Now the lamp in the theater is not part of what's going on in the audience or on the stage. We could say that the lamp and the light is completely aloof. We could say it's detached. But really, it's not detached because it's the light. When you think about it, the light is going out and is lighting up everything. Everything is being touched by the light. Everything is being enabled by the light. Nothing can happen without the light. And yet, the light doesn't see, is not like anybody in the audience. doesn't see, doesn't hear anything. The light is not like anybody on the stage. It doesn't move, doesn't act. The light doesn't think, doesn't feel. All it does is shine. That's your consciousness. I'm telling you, this is the Sankhya analysis. The Purusha, that is your true self, your soul, language of Vedanta, yourself, your Atman, your true self is like a light. It shines. It's awareness. Now, this is an analogy of this is the goal or the conceptualization of the yoga psychology. Now, yoga psychology, it's got to be about psyche. It's got to be about mind. And yeah, okay, what is the mind? The mind in yoga psychology is compared to a lake. A very helpful analogy for us. In the Yoga Sutras, we can visualize a lake. And maybe the wind is blowing, and maybe the rain is falling. And we can imagine that the surface of that water of the lake is all fragmented and is moving and is shaking and is upset and disturbed. Kind of like our mind. Completely scattered. And yet, if the wind, this is the analysis, that yoga means if we could diminish the force of the blowing wind, that is our desires and distractions, that gradually we could calm our mind. Now this is what yoga psychology is about. Yoga is not interested in what's in your mind, about your structure of your mind. Yoga is only interested in your mind, the mind itself. And yogis are interested in the stillness of the mind, in the water, let's say the lake. They're not interested in the fish or whatever else is in the lake. They're interested only in the stillness of the lake or in the purity of the water. That's their main concern. And the goal of yoga is to gradually to still and to quiet your internal nature, controlling your internal nature, so that the mind becomes more and more calm and placid. That's non-controversial, right? It doesn't seem to be much. Wouldn't that be nice if we had a calm, detached, placid mind, kind of like, how wonderful it would be that all the trees and all the flowers and everything on the banks of the river, on a lake, now we could see clearly. We could look into the lake there and we could see things as they really are, and not seeing through a glass darkly, everything all discombobulated. We see reality, things as they are. Furthermore, the yogis say, that's not really the purpose, to see things as they are. The purpose is once you've made the mind like a mirror, the purpose is to gradually to turn that mirror back towards yourself. And once you do that, then that mirror, like a parabolic mirror, will reflect yourself to yourself, and you will become enlightened. That means you will fully recall your true nature. You'll become liberated. You'll become free. And you will become yourself again, in the language of Vedanta philosophy. So that's yoga psychology. You can see how radically different it is from what we usually call, what we learned in Psychology 101 in the Department of Psychology. This is really self-psychology. It's really soul psychology, we could say. So in summary, we look over what I've said kind of this morning. That we have yoga, and we have practical applied psychology and psychotherapy. Both of these methodologies are useful to us and helpful to us in our goal, which is holistic growth. But each one of these has its own area, or its own domain, and applies and is to one part of the spectrum of development. We begin at the bottom of the valley. We travel up. Our goal, reach the foothills of the Himalayas. And then when we reach there, we see that there's a new paths unfold. Paths that lead up to the mountain peaks. And so that we can begin another journey, a new purpose, something new that gives a higher meaning, a greater purpose to our life. And so it is for us today that here we are. We've come a long way. But we could say that we're up there on the foothills. And now the focus of our attention needs to be directed towards this height psychology, this new vision of the purpose, our purpose and our meaning. And that is to realize our soul, our true self. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksha Ham Shanti Prithivi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Saravam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sa Me Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.